What if I told you there was a child who could hear entire symphonies in his mind before he could even write his own name? A boy who bent music to his will, yet spent his life in chains he could not see. This is the story of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, the genius the world adored and the system devoured. Wolfgang was born in Harmonia, a glittering capital of empire and etiquette. His father, Leopold, a strict court musician, drilled him day and night. To him, Wolfgang was not a child, he was a mission. The court of Harmonia demanded elegance, obedience, perfection. There was no room for wildness, no room for a soul that burned brighter than chandeliers. At 5, Wolfgang stunned the court. At 7, he played for kings. At 9, he composed music no adult could follow, but applause is a poor substitute for childhood. They called him Miracle. They fed him praise, fame, and forced smiles. But behind every compliment was a leash. The empire loved music, but only music that obeyed. Notes were to be polite, predictable, obedient. Wolfgang's melodies were none of those things. His mind ran faster than his hands, ideas rushed through him at unbearable speed, and the world felt too slow, too dull, too narrow. The court sent him across the continent to display Harmonia's glory. Palaces, masquerades, champagne, diamonds, yet Wolfgang saw only loneliness in gold. Whispers began. How dare a child surpass masters? Jealous men with powdered faces sharpened their smiles and waited for the moment to strike. By 12, he had conquered the stage, but never learned to play in the street, chase friends, or be ordinary. Prodigies are born with wings, but the world locks them in gilded cages. Wolfgang returned home as a decorated prodigy, but Harmonia remembered only one rule: you belong to us. The court assigned him duties, schedules, expectations, symphonies on command, applause on cue. Genius became labor, music became obedience. There was another force in Harmonia, Maestro Salierius, the court's favorite, a man of order, protocol, and polished mediocrity. Salierius smiled at the boy, but his eyes said, "There is space for only one at the top." And Wolfgang, too naive for court warfare, never saw the daggers behind the compliments. Wolfgang wrote melodies that broke rules: wild modulations, daring rhythms, laughter, pain, fire. The court demanded order. Wolfgang answered with freedom. He refused to rewrite his work for the nobles. They called it arrogance. He called it truth. They punished him not with chains, but with luxury. Concerts, parties, masquerades, endless smiles, a golden prison. At a small performance outside the palace walls, Wolfgang met Constantia, bright, rebellious, alive. She listened, not as a courtly critic, but as a soul. With her, he played as he wished, not for applause, not for masters, but for joy. And the music felt alive again. Constantia urged him to break free of Harmonia's grip. "Leave the palace," she whispered, "be yours." But freedom has a price.
Wolfgang chose love, art, and danger over obedience, comfort, and chains. The court never forgave him. The empire erased his name from programs and halls. No patron, no salary. Just freedom and hunger. He swore he would write music not for kings, but for humanity. For laughter, tears, and truth. Behind palace walls, Salierius smiled. The throne was his again. But even his shadows trembled at the music Wolfgang would unleash. Wolfgang's next work shook the city. Wild, explosive, honest. People whispered, "A fallen man should not sound like heaven." Some called him a genius reborn, others, a disgrace to tradition. Wolfgang learned the truth of fame. It crowns and poisons in the same breath. He married Constantia in a modest chapel. No royal orchestra, no diamonds. Just two hearts against an empire. Their apartment was tiny, the winter brutal. Yet Wolfgang laughed more freely than in any gilded hall. He wrote faster than ever, operas, sonatas, symphonies. No court rules, no noble corrections, just truth in sound. Salierius whispered into powerful ears. Concert halls closed their doors. Wolfgang's name vanished from official lists. Again, bills mounted, doors closed. Wolfgang pawned his coat to buy paper for notes. Genius cannot feed a family. Not in a world that fears it. Sleepless nights, cold rooms, endless pressure. His body began to break long before his spirit did. A minor noble, Marquis Lorien, recognized his brilliance and offered support, just enough to breathe again. With renewed strength, Wolfgang unleashed a storm of genius, music that laughed, cried, rebelled, and prayed. Even his enemies listened. But every triumph cost a piece of him. Each standing ovation felt shorter than the silence that followed. At a grand celebration, nobles smiled, toasted, and praised, while plotting his downfall between sips of golden wine. Wolfgang's body trembled with fever, yet he composed through the pain. The music demanded life, even as life left him. The court issued a decree. Wolfgang was forbidden from performing in Harmonia's grand halls. An unspoken death sentence for any composer. Abandoned by patrons, hunted by debt, weakened by illness, he had every reason to surrender. But Wolfgang chose the only weapon he ever had: music. From the edge of ruin, he began writing something new. Music not for fame nor the court, but for the soul itself. One night, a masked stranger knocked on his door with a secret commission to write a requiem for an unnamed soul. Wolfgang accepted, unaware he was writing for his own fate. As he composed, the music grew darker, heavier, truer. He poured into it all his pain, hunger, love, and fear. Each bar felt like a confession. Constantia begged him to rest, but Wolfgang whispered, "If I stop now, the music will die before I do." Salierius heard of the requiem and waited like a vulture, certain the masterpiece would be finished only by death. Winter hit Harmonia with iron teeth. Wolfgang's body collapsed, but his mind refused to yield. He composed from bed, ink trembling on the page. He gathered a few friends and sang the requiem with them, his voice cracking, his eyes burning. They wept, knowing the truth he would not say. Unable to stand, unable to breathe, Wolfgang reached out for the unfinished pages. "I must finish. Before the dawn." Before sunrise, the candle died. And so did he. The final notes remained unwritten. But the music had already entered eternity. No imperial funeral, no golden coffin, just a simple grave and a grieving widow, while the empire pretended not to notice. Months later, the same nobles who scorned him praised his genius to impress each other. Hypocrisy played louder than any orchestra. The requiem was finally performed, and the audience wept, feeling a soul they never allowed to live freely. His music crossed borders, oceans, centuries. Kings died, empires fell, but his melodies never bowed. Salierius grew old, forgotten, bitter. He lived long enough to witness the truth, that envy buries itself. Wolfgang died young, and thus remained forever young in memory. Genius does not age, it echoes. He proved that music is not a servant of thrones, but a voice of the soul. And the soul bows to no master. Children now learn his notes before they learn history. His music became the history. Harmonia, once his cage, now built monuments in his honor. Too late for the man, but not for the message. He left a question behind, not in words, but in sound. Will we dare to live not just obey. His life was short. His struggle was brutal. But his final chord still resonates. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart is gone, yet he plays on. In every orchestra, every piano, every beating heart that chooses freedom over fear. Because music does not die. It only waits for the next soul brave enough to listen.